Hi class, welcome to session 3 of creative writing. By now you should be almost done with the rough draft of your story, which is going to be due on Sunday at midnight. In this lecture, I want to talk about some of the common elements found in all literature. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, or even if you just want to discuss some things further. I think it's incredibly interesting information, and I hope you think so too. Let me tell you about the internship I had when I was a freshman in college. I worked at a little film studio in my hometown of Loveland, Colorado. As I say intern, I use that really loosely because I really just observed my bosses working and then wrote screenplays of my own and then asked them for feedback. One of the best learning experiences I got from this was something that Dave, the director, told me. He said that the best stories are both universal and incredibly specific at the same time. Let me show you what I mean. Think about the masterpiece To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. At a universal level, this story is about a struggle for civil rights. It confronts issues of equality and social corruption that are found all over the world. But how does Harper Lee take these huge universal ideas and fit them into a story that's less than 300 pages long? Well, she does it by putting universal ideas into a specific story. At a specific level, To Kill a Mockingbird is about Atticus Finch, a white lawyer who chooses to defend Tom Robinson, who's a black man accused of raping a white woman. Atticus Finch puts his entire reputation on the line by doing this, and he goes against a southern culture that is very racist and almost totally against him. So why does he do it? Well, he does it because, as he tells his son, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. Okay, so let's think about this idea in terms of popular culture today. Suzanne Collins, the author of The Hunger Games, was inspired to write her trilogy after noticing that reality shows are many times followed with the same intensity as news broadcasts showing footage of war and violence. Suzanne had said that these two ideas began to blur in a very unsettling way, thus giving her inspiration to write a book about it. The universal theme of The Hunger Games is that the modern world has become too accustomed to the idea of being entertained, even if it's at the expense of others' pain and death. Where does reality end and the game begin? Suzanne deals with this relevant subject through a specific story of Katniss Everdeen, a tough but loving girl who has chosen to fight in a televised game against 23 other children. If she wins this gruesome competition, she will be the only competitor left alive. The story obviously has unpleasant moments, but it's a theme we should all take to heart. Okay, this one's just for fun. Think about the universal ideas of trusting the wisdom of elders, the power of friendship and loyalty, even if you thought that friend was an enemy at first. I think you can get the specific story from here. So universal themes and specific plots are general characteristics of nearly all stories, but I want to show you some other common literary devices. Have you ever heard of the saying, breaking the fourth wall? You see it a lot in television shows like The Office and in movies like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's where the characters or the story itself acknowledge that the audience is watching them. In literature, breaking the fourth wall is known as authorial intrusion. C.S. Lewis used authorial intrusion many times while writing the Chronicles of Narnia. He uses it when describing what it's like to talk to the characters Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. He says, "This was bad grammar at first, of course. But that is how beavers talk when they are excited. I mean, in our world, they usually don't talk at all." The author John Fowles was the master of authorial intrusion. In his novel, The French Lieutenant's Woman, Fowles stops the whole story halfway through, if only to ask questions like, "What do you think of my story so far? Do you like it? Do you understand what I'm trying to do here?" Later on in the story, Fowles makes his appearance known again, but this time by completely writing himself into the story, as a man that the protagonist sits next to on the train. Don't you hate it when you get to the end of a really good story and then you read those dreaded words, "and they woke up, and it was all just a dream," or "and they lived happily ever after"? There's a name for this dissatisfying kind of ending, and it's called Deus Ex Machina, which is Latin for God of the Machine. This idea is that the author has created a story so fanciful or complex that they don't have the time or the patience to tie up all the loose ends. Instead of finding a resolution to the story, they rely on God to do it. Think about the Wizard of Oz. Dorothy and her friends have washed away the Wicked Witch and have been given gifts by the great and powerful Wizard of Oz. But there's one last thing to resolve. How's Dorothy going to get back to Kansas? Instead of putting time into telling a long story about the adventurous journey back home, the author of The Wizard of Oz, L. Frank Baum, lets God guide her home by writing that all she has to do is tap her ruby red slippers 3 times and say, "There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home." And let God do the rest. Well, couldn't she have done that anytime? Well, sure. I love The Wizard of Oz too, and I suppose it's okay to use Deus Ex Machina in children's stories. But what about other stories? By the end of H.G. Wells' novel War of the Worlds, we see a very bleak scene where humanity has almost entirely been brought to its knees by a race of aliens who are bigger and stronger than we could ever hope to be. So how can this story find a happy ending? Well, instead of retelling a story about a slow and difficult road for humans to build strength and intelligence enough to fend off themselves against the aliens, H.G. Wells lets God intervene through giving the invaders a common cold. Yeah, a common cold. The extraterrestrials aren't immune to the viruses that we humans have lived with for thousands of years, and they eventually become so sick from Earth's many diseases that they just die off. Let me get something straight. I'm a big fan of H.G. Wells' work, and I actually really like the ending he created for this novel. But you also have to admit that this ending is a quick way to resolve a very complex story. So let this be a lesson to you. Use Deus Ex Machina with caution. God can help you resolve the story troubles, but you gotta meet him halfway there. Let's talk about motifs. Motifs are the symbolic elements that repeat throughout your writing to show that something is incredibly significant to the characters, theme, or plot. To explore this further, we'll revisit The Hunger Games. Throughout the book series, Katniss Everdeen becomes famous throughout the country for the Mockingjay pendant she wears upon her lapel. The Mockingjays appear several times in the story as a symbol of rebellion and triumph of the underdogs. Katniss wears the Mockingjay pendant as a subtle jab to the greedy creators of the Hunger Games to say, "I'm not going to submit to your rules. You can't change me." Motifs can be anything you can imagine, from colors to objects to ideas to people and even words themselves. Kurt Vonnegut is one of my favorite authors of all time. In his book, Slaughterhouse-Five, the main character, Billy Pilgrim, is afflicted by a terrible condition where the timeline of his life is mixed up and randomized instead of having a linear lifespan like everyone else. At one moment, Billy may be a 6-year-old boy playing on the schoolyard, and the next moment he's a prisoner of war. Then he might suddenly reappear back in high school. Because of his condition, Billy must surrender to any kind of control he may think he has. How can he have any control over his life if he spends one day playing on the beach with his childhood dog, and the next as an old man in the hospital with cancer? How can anyone survive like that? As a way of bringing comfort to his own crazy life, Billy must constantly repeat the phrase, "So it goes," almost as if it's a coping mechanism. Life happens. Happiness, sadness, frustration, and pain, and sometimes the best thing we can do is lay back and say, "So it goes." I threw some big concepts at you today. The meshing of universal truth with a specific story, breaking the fourth wall with authorial intrusion, a warning against letting God do your messy work with Deus Ex Machina, and the incredible power that a motif can have on a story. Let these ideas roll around in your head, and feel free to watch this lecture as many times as you'd like. Think about, how can you universalize the theme of your story? What can you use as a motif? Would authorial intrusion be a helpful way of storytelling? Think about it, and remember, if you start getting writer's block, sometimes the best thing you can do is just get up away from writing for a while. Get something to eat, go to sleep for a little bit, and say, "So it goes." Good luck, and write strong.